So with that, sir, we're going to bring up our good friend Ken Peterman, and he is going to have a wonderful fireside chat with the Honorable Ellen Lord. Secretary Lord, it's great to see you. I don't know if you can see us yet, but thanks for being with us. Thanks for being flexible on your time. Really appreciate that. Without further ado, well, I have to have a little bit of ado. We're big fans of your, Secretary Lord. I want you to know that. And it's been sort of a bucket.
Thank you for allowing me to participate. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. It's been a bucket list item for us. We want to have you on our program if we could. And I want to thank Ken and everyone for making that happen. So it's wonderful. Anyway, so I'm going to turn it over to Ken. You'll do some introductions. You guys will have a wonderful chat, and we'll check back in with you at the end of the program.
All right, David. Thank you, Scott. And I can't tell you how much I've been looking forward to this. The Honorable Ellen Lord has a prolific presence across the defense industrial base as well as the government community. She's insightful, she's outspoken, she's forward thinking. She's been a friend of mine a long time. We talk fairly often, more now that she has stepped away from her government job a little bit and then taken on some board positions. But I have to tell you that I have such a deep respect for Miss Ellen Lord. She some of you know that she most recently served as the Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition and Sustainment, and in fact was the first woman in American history to hold that post, and that's couldn't be more deserving in that capacity. Prior to that appointment, I knew her as the president and CEO of Textron Systems, a corporation where a high-tech corporation where she led a multi-billion-dollar business, a broad range of products and services supporting defense, homeland security, I think aerospace, infrastructure protection, and frankly had a global presence serving customers around the world, and then had a variety of industry positions, leadership positions prior to that. So it is my pleasure to host the Honorable Ellen Lord in this fireside chat, and I'll offer her the opportunity to offer some opening remarks.
Great. Thanks so much, Ken. Well, I'm really excited to be here with America's Future Series and to be able to chat with Ken, who, as he said, I've known a long time, have enormous respect for what Viasat's doing and all that's going on in space. Where my real interest lies here is at the intersection of national security and industry. And I think there's a growing level of communication, and I think that there's an enormous amount we can do to move forward here in the time of near-peer threats. We really are at a pivotal moment here, not only transitioning from worrying about violent extremist organizations to China and Russia, but we're also here at a pivotal moment where the government no longer develops the majority of the cutting edge technology. It's really coming from commercial industry. So lots to be done and lots of opportunity.
Yeah, thank you. So one of the things I'm really interested in, because you have this balanced perspective, this diverse perspective as a CEO of a high-tech industry player, and then also as an Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition and Sustainment, and really at a time when these technology leaderships positions crossed over, right? Well, you know, you and I have been in this defense sector a long time, and we've been part of DoD leveraging a defense industrial base to develop technologies and capabilities that didn't exist before: satellite communications, mobile networking, global positioning systems, the jet engine. There's been a variety of things that DoD invented in order to empower our young men and women in uniform, to enable them to be connected at the tactical edge, to help keep them safe, and things like GPS that involves has a space presence in order to provide them position, location, navigation, and timing capabilities in order for them to execute their mission. So you have this balanced perspective from technology, corporate leadership, as well as government, as this technology leadership crosses over and moves from the defense industrial base to the private sector. Now DoD finds itself in a difficult position because this noble history, the acquisition policy, practice, and even culture of inventing things that have never been done before, now it has to find itself a way to adapt. in order to assess private sector technologies, to employ them effectively to empower the warfighter. And it's a major change in terms of policy, practice, and culture. What's your perspective on that, on DoD's acquisition policy and practice? How is it changing to more rapidly adopt commercial technologies?
Well, the key is the need for speed. And so what we've realized is DoD needs to be able to leverage everything going on in the industrial sector, all of the commercial developments. What we did when I was in DoD was to rewrite acquisition policy to make it more flexible. So a couple points there. One, we identified that hardware is different than software. And we really have hardware enabled platforms that are software defined. So we bifurcated those processes a little bit so that we could get those reps and sets with the software and upgrade what is out there. That is one acknowledgement of how things are different. But we also are in an environment where the cyber threats are numerous. So now we have overlaid onto the acquisition policy the need to make sure that the defense industrial base has hardened networks so that you cannot have those incursions. We also have put requirements in to cyber harden weapons and platforms and so forth. So all of those things are a step in the right direction. I think the challenge is, as I learned early on moving into government, is this is truly a team sport, and you cannot have one or two people through sheer force of will make changes. You can be the champion, but you have to bring those along with you. The analogy that I put together for myself when I was trying to make sense of how all these government pieces worked is, if I was putting an industrial lens on, that where I sat at the Office of Secretary of Defense in acquisition and sustainment with oversight for this almost $400 billion spend, is that we at OSD were like corporate. So we were this corporate oversight layer that got involved in high risk situations. The services were the operating units. And then instead of having 10 or 20 people on your board, we had Congress with almost 550 board members. So the complexity is enormous. And you don't go and just work with one constituent, not everybody else. So communication is incredibly important. And if we are really going to achieve this speed of being able to take commercial developments and hopefully just for an incremental cost, make them militarized, if you will, and get a step function change in performance, we need a way to do that quickly. And I won't get into all the boring details, but we came up with this adaptive acquisition framework with other transaction authorities, middle tier acquisition, that basically, instead of talking about things in PowerPoint and around a conference room table for months and years, we actually were getting capability in warfighters' hands and letting them experiment downrange so that we could get all of those cycles.
Yeah, so, and it's challenging, right? Because with the pace of the technology change, and you alluded to the pace of the changing threat too, whether it's cyber or other things, the pace of change is dramatic. And so in industry, it's pretty common practice for us to begin a production run and then break in additional changes at regular intervals, sometimes every few months, because we're constantly improving feature sets or addressing additional optimizing use cases as use cases for our products evolve, and we need to accelerate or implement additional features to maintain a consistent and improving customer experience, to protect ourselves from competitive threats for similar products and those kinds of things. We're in industry, we're comfortable with that, but in government, the practice has been that you invent a capability like a tactical radio or a GPS, and then what happens is you field a single holistic baseline to the entire force, okay, which might take a decade, okay, and then you schedule a system-wide upgrade at year 15 or something in its 30 years cycle, right? And so you have to, you come in with this industry experience, and now with these accelerated technology trajectories, you have to try to drive that kind of a mindset, and you have to kind of create a comfort level in government to kind of not just accept the fact, but embrace the idea that the technology is constantly changing, and we're going to be constantly folding in upgrades. We're constantly going to be improving the capability and increasing our resilience against threats. Again, and you have a workforce. You spoke of yourself at the corporate level, but as you go down, you have a contracting and a project workforce that in large degree is very risk averse, right? Because people's lives are on the line, and you have to be really careful and you have to be thoughtful. So how do you, those are some interesting challenges. I'm just interested in your perspective.
So I would call it a lot of dynamic tension, and two key pieces here. The workforce has been trained to be very compliant and have almost a pilot's checklist mentality, which works really well when you're flying an aircraft and you want to make sure you do your run up correctly and you have no issues. However, what we need, I believe, is to get minimum viable product out there and continue to cycle in improvements. So I keep saying I'm no longer in DOD, all the great capable people there are working hard to train the acquisition workforce to do that. And even the way the training's going on at DAU is very different. Instead of having professors with their finger on the transmit button, it has become much, much more of a dialogue and getting current practitioners to come in and talk about how they used what I like to call creative compliance. You are compliant, but you go to the edges of what your authorities are to make sure you tailor the solution to what is needed. So you don't check every box, you check just enough boxes to make sure you're compliant, you're legal, and you can get something out there. Now, we do everything from TEDx talks now at DAU to try to foster that difference. But a lot of the acquisition professionals have learned that if they trip, they can get called up to Congress and have the opportunity to have all the cameras on them and get a lot of questions that are quite uncomfortable. And they don't want to put themselves or the department in that position. So they tend to be risk averse. So what we tried to do was bring people forward who are those mavericks that were really kind of the new acquisition warriors out there showing the art of the possible. So the acquisition workforce is one of the challenges, and they're stepping up. And there's some great examples. IVAS in the Army with augmented reality, the B-52 re-engineering in the Air Force, really using the new authorities and doing a good job. But then on the other side, you have Congress. And they have a conundrum because they are supposed to be stewards of the taxpayer dollars, yet they don't, and they have always been taught that they have to know where every dollar is going. So when the budgets come out, when a program gets funds, they want to know exactly how all those funds are going to be expended. Well, if you're doing Agile and DevSecOps and you're running quickly, you don't know. And so you have to say, trust me. And that's a difficult, sort of chasm. So what we started to do with Pathfinder programs, so it's kind of a crawl, walk, run, give us this authority with what we called software color of money that wasn't just development or production or sustainment, because these things are a continuum, and that lets you move fast. But we have to continue to have DOD show the Hill how they can use all of these new authorities to leverage all of the great fast-paced changes in the marketplace to field them to the warfighter without being accused, if you will, of being irresponsible with money. So it's a real shift here to really follow that pace of technology innovation with acquisition, innovation, and practice.
Yeah, and again, I think that that requires bold leadership that starts at the top. And once again, I commend your leadership at this transformational time. I have a little bit of personal experience with this because at Viasat, we're a satellite communications company, and we provide in-flight satellite connectivity to commercial airlines, essentially bringing an at-home or at-office quality internet connectivity experience to each seat of the aircraft. And we went to the senior leader community, the Presidential Airlift Group and others, and we argued that our senior leaders should have the same kind of connectivity. And it was a tough road to dislodge a 10 or 15 year incumbent that had been providing that capability. But we did that. And we won that contract sole source in 2016. And then what we successfully did, and this is a kind of bold leadership that I think you're talking about, is we initially put a single satellite terminal on the aircraft in 2016. About a year later, we updated that antenna so that it could connect not just to GEO satellites, but also could roam between GEO and MEO, geosynchronous orbit satellites, as well as mid-orbit satellites. And then about a year later, we updated the terminal again and put a second terminal on the aircraft so that we could connect to multiple networks simultaneously. And then we've upgraded equipment and software and that kind of thing on a continuum. And that's very unprecedented in a DoD environment. So I have a little bit of experience of how this is changing, and what it does is it puts the user community on a continuum of constantly improving capability that keeps pace with their constantly evolving use case of what they want to do when they're on the aircraft, using my example. Now, getting back to your challenges, okay, when you're inventing technology in this DoD acquisition community, you rely heavily on federally funded research and development centers. We call them FFRDCs. You rely and lean also on university affiliated research centers, or UARCs, and in many ways they are the technology experts that understand where the cutting edge envelope is, okay, today, where it'll be 6 months or a year from now, and you depend on that community. Now, again, as technology leadership moves to the private sector, it poses challenges in these FFRDCs and UARCs. In other words, where is state of the art? If you have this space mania where you have 100 companies investing billions of dollars in space innovation and that kind of thing, using just space as an example. How in your leadership position in DoD and Office Secretary of Defense, how do you coax forward the role of FFRDCs and UARCs in this transformational environment?
I think it comes to communicating how the department is looking both at requirements as well as acquisition. General John Hyten is working very hard with the Joint Staff, who really determines requirements through the JROC process. And instead of coming out with defining specific capability with KPPs and very narrow definitions, John's pulling back and saying, wait a second, what is the gap in warfighting capability out there? And what is needed? What does the warfighter need to be able to do? They're trying to capture that, so that in turn opens the aperture hugely, instead of saying we need this widget with this dimension and this power load and blah, 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 blah type thing. What I think the FFRDCs and the UARCs can do, because they sort of have one foot in each community, is they can be the translators from DoD back to industry, understanding the technology out there as to how do you modify that technology to apply it to the warfighting capability that the department needs. So they can be a critical interface in doing that. I think a lot of the UARCs and FFRDCs have been relegated to being congressional report writers to a large degree. And I was actually just on the Hill yesterday saying, hey, lighten up on these reports, just ask for briefings because you're using way, way too much of the capacity of DoD to generate these reports. Let them get out there and work. But I think that there is a place for FFRDCs and UARCs because they can echo and amplify for DoD what is needed and really go work the industrial base to communicate. Because one of our biggest challenges is really communication. The DoD is this huge organization, and I talk all the time to industry members who don't understand who the real decision makers are. And I said decision makers because there isn't just one person. There are a lot of people. You have to know who to go talk to. I think UARCs and FFRDCs are underutilized from that point of view in terms of industry, that they could play a part there. I think also there's a critical role here where UARCs and FFRDCs understand the critical technologies that are being embraced by DoD and are really going to allow us to increase that overmatch against adversaries. So I'm talking about artificial intelligence, digital engineering, big data analysis. Things are just being done very differently now, and they can help DoD determine how do you really embrace digital engineering so that industry is developing inside of a government cloud, and that government can then get in there and review, and we can have so many more design cycles in each stage of a program. How do you get the best sustainment buck, bang for your buck? It's not always the major primes, right? There are a lot of companies out there that are very good at sustainment. You do digital engineering, then you have those designs you can share. So those are a couple examples.
So you, well said. So you spent a little bit of time in that comment regarding a move towards specifying outcomes versus specifying the how, and actually competing on a kind of a build to print basis on lowest price, technically acceptable. And so it's interesting because earlier in this American Future Series Space Innovation Summit, and I know some people may not have seen it, so I'll recap it briefly. We had a gentleman named Chris Colbert talking with a company about, and he's from NASA. And he was talking about a typical space flight to the moon, if NASA developed it, would take a certain amount of time and cost a certain amount of money. They elected to outsource the next 6 trips to the moon. Okay, and what they found is that they're going to conduct 6 trips to the moon for the price of 1. And they're going to go over about a 3 or 4 year period, which cuts the timeline by a significant margin. It cuts the cost of a trip to about less than 20% of what it was, 6 to 1. And the interesting thing he mentioned that as an industry leader, I took note of, is he said he has chosen that his NASA team would not even attend the preliminary design review or the critical design review, because how the trip happens is actually not their concern. Their concern is that the outcome meets their expectations. So think, perhaps, think about how this addresses the historical and cultural way that acquisition has been done in the past.
It's huge.
Think how it affects things like IP ownership and government purpose rights, because basically they're stepping back and saying, private sector, innovate as fast as you can and we will leverage the opportunity.
It goes back to buying a service. And this, I believe, is going to be the wave of the future, because number one, DoD is going to have a flat budget at best. And with inflation, that probably means their budget's going down. NASA's going to be constrained. So how do you leverage that taxpayer dollar? If you can clearly articulate to articulate what you want to do, and you can create competition, which is your friend, and you can buy a service, you are in the best spot possible. Air Force did this, was launch as a service. It's been incredibly successful. There might be a bit of government investment at the front end, maybe some Defense Production Act Title III type money to get the infrastructure in place, some small contracts perhaps. But if we could get commercial space industry to the point where they can easily contract with government, whether it be DoD, NASA, whoever, we are in the best spot possible, because obviously there are dual uses for most everything we're talking about in space. And again, if you can take that commercial development and tweak it for the national security need, and even better if you could take all of that installed base out there commercially and be able to turn on or off certain features, then we're in a very, very strong position. And buying space capability as a service, I think, is a very attractive business model. There clearly are the acquisition mechanisms to do that. However, it's a cultural issue that we need to explore, both for the government side as well as industry, as how do we do this most appropriately. But if we had some big IDIQs where you could put task orders on for different service support for, launch by launch, that's an incredible opportunity.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I want to shift the conversation a little bit to the effect of near peer threats and those kinds of things. But before I do, I was in a talk with Z, who's very prominent in the American Futures series recently. And to your point, I used the example of how we have a history in defense acquisition, and we use the automobile as an analogy, is that we believe that we want the automobile built a certain way, and we're going to compete hubcaps to lowest price. We're going to compete the carburetor on lowest price, and we're going to do that on every aspect of an automobile. And then the government's going to put the thing together and deliver that to the warfighter and live with it for a 20-year or 30-year life. And today, the technology is moving so fast that we've had to move to a business model more like leasing a car, because the technology on the cockpit of the car is changing rapidly, and we want to be able to empower that operator of the car with the latest technology in terms of connectivity, cloud empowerment, navigation, and those kinds of things. Cloud empowered proactive tipping and queuing with capabilities like Waze and things like that. Now, as we look at the business model's evolution, we actually still are challenged because DoD never knows where the fight's going to break out. So they have to keep an inventory of bought or leased automobiles all over the world in the event that they're there at the instant that they need them. So now we find ourselves moving to an opportunity like Uber or Lyft. And instead of owning the operator, the automobile, there is such an enormous capacity in terms of private sector, say satellite communications, that DoD perhaps can leverage that. And now it just has to download an app and it can compete. It can sit on a curb, to use my automobile analogy, and it can request a ride from Uber and a ride from Lyft at the same time. And it can determine that one ride is a little cheaper, but it takes a little longer. The car may not be quite as suitable. So what happens is they compete that at the app level, and it enables, it goes back to the bold leadership on the part of the DoD corporate office, okay, to encourage the acquisition workforce to embrace these innovative business models, to capture the technology dividend and to capture the investment benefit of the private sector's making in these technologies. So if you'd like to comment on that, feel free.
Absolutely. So what it really gets down to is, instead of specifying all of these details about a system of some type, it comes down to the interfaces and compatibility. So it really comes down to APIs and things like that. So when DoD is thinking about JADC2 and programs like that, we really have to define data requirements to some point to some point so that you can ingest that data. You have to be able to analyze it. You have to be able to communicate across all different types of systems. So it really comes down to defining the interfaces and the overall capability. So there's a big discussion going on about data standards. There's a big discussion about what will be the different protocols used. And I think where the real opportunity is to find how you can connect all those things together and make sure that there's an enormous number of companies that understand that they have that well defined, so that whoever has the latest, greatest thing can come and it can be leveraged. So again, it's somewhat similar to the COCO model, the owned, contractor operated. You meet the requirements and you buy a capability for a certain amount of time. I think we'll see more and more of that. I think we'll see more of the GOCOs, the government owned, contractor operated, because the government is just not going to be able to have all of the cutting edge experts, which leads into another challenge the department has about how can we more quickly get people in from industry to do 1-2 year stints at DoD, to be able to infuse that know-how to inform industry of how government really works. These exchanges can be incredibly powerful. Up to now, the legal considerations have been so onerous that you really kind of handcuff those from industry when they go back. But I think, again, a lot of progress has been made. We need to do more of that. But I believe buying capability kind of by the drink is really the wave of the future. So there's a challenge both in how we set the requirements at the joint staff level, working with the COCOMs, then how do we have the acquisition flexibility to be able to go out and buy that? But before industry can be there ready to support it, they have to understand what the latest requirements are coming out of the Department of Defense. And I think leadership is making enormous efforts right now to get out and communicate that. But these types of forums are very important for informing that and having the back and forth, the Q&A to get at some of that.
Yeah, that's a great point. So well said. So let's focus a minute on the threat scenarios, because while this private sector technology leadership is an enormous opportunity for DoD, one could argue that it's also a threat to DoD, because this private sector technology in many ways might be available to our adversaries. We look at in space, we look at commercial surveillance, commercial Earth surveillance, and those kinds of things, and you can buy photos now from third parties and that kind of thing. So we have so what have DoD and industry done to adjust focus on near-peer threats? Certainly China and Russia are two near-peer threats, but also countering violent extremist organizations, or VEOs, as directed in our national defense strategy that was published just recently under your tenure in 2018. So speak to that aspect of it a little bit.
There has really been a pivot to how do you move faster in terms of developing warfighting capability using critical new technologies. So for instance, I mentioned digital engineering earlier. There is a rapid move to make sure that we develop in a secure environment for all these very reasons you're talking about. And having industry come and develop inside of a government cloud can be a very good solution, so that you're not moving all of this data around, that it can be more carefully monitored. You can reach in and get it, whether it be for the development phase, the production phase, or the sustainment phase. There's also a huge effort to take all of the AI developments and look at all of this unstructured data out there and be able to understand what the threats are, what the trends are. I think Probably the best example of this is with supply chain analysis. COVID actually had a silver lining for the Department of Defense because FEMA and HHS quickly found early last year that they had such a huge demand signal for all types of medical equipment, whether it be PPE, whether it be vaccines, whatever. And they didn't have the ability to understand if they were buying counterfeit N95 masks, for instance. So Department of Defense came in with a lot of supply chain illumination tools that were empowered by artificial intelligence and very quickly could understand the beneficial ownership of a lot of these companies. Well, we extended that to the defense industrial base, and that is being used more and more now to understand what is this that we are buying and where, does the family tree branch back to Russia or China sometimes. That is becoming incredibly important. There are a number of executive orders that have been put out around that. Right now, the HASC has a task force looking at supply chain. This is going to be an area that will get more and more emphasis and where technology really matters, big data, AI, all the rest of it. So I think the big change here is in taking all of these emerging technologies and focusing them not only on developing new services and capabilities, but looking back at the security and the resiliency of what we are building there. And I think that the intelligence community has been pretty impressive in terms of what they've been able to uncover. Cybercom is doing an incredible job. Just, most of the nation doesn't know all these things that are going on, but there are a lot of tentacles looking at who's out there. Now, again, to go back to my comments about Congress is helping enable this by writing legislation that allows us to deal with all of these nefarious actors and so forth. But it's complicated, it's moving fast, and it really has to be a partnership.
Yeah, we're running a little long on time, but I want to delve into this just a little further before I offer you an opportunity for some closing remarks. But we had on a part of this American Future Series Space Innovation Summit yesterday a gentleman that I think Lieutenant General Kevin McLaughlin, former Deputy Commander at Cyber Command, a friend of yours and mine both. And he spoke about some of this and actually the opportunity that as our warfighters roam in and among a hybrid network that includes both commercial as well as military purpose-built communications assets, satellites, and that kind of thing. First of all, it presents an opportunity for them because it improves resilience, because they're no longer a dominant user. There's so much satellite capacity in space, and it's getting better exponentially, that they're now a fractional user, and they can, in a sense, hide in plain sight and roam very affordably on and among these various commercial networks. It also presents an opportunity from a cyber defense perspective, because when companies like Viasat operate a satellite communications network that includes millions of devices, we have a very diverse user community with a very diverse set of use cases. As a result, we see a very diverse set of cyber threats, and our machine learning and AI capabilities learn even faster when they have this diverse data that they can manage. If it's a very holistic network with a single user community, such as military users or something like that, the cyber threat demographic is much more holistic, much more consistent, much more uniform, and as a result, it's more difficult to see the threat evolution as it moves from a low priority target like a housewife or a commercial business or something to a high priority target like a government or a military user. So there are many benefits there that Kevin talked about. But moving to another aspect of this, how does, in an acquisition perspective, you talked about a variety of the impacts, supply chain particularly. How does it affect things like ITAR or CFIUS or the risk of foreign investment in some of these private sector companies that are developing some of these cutting edge technology? Are those areas where in your capacity as an industry CEO of a high-tech company or as a acquisition and sustainment OSD leader, are those areas also that you have a perspective on or some concerns about?
Absolutely. Let me make one other point, Ken, building on what you said. Not only, as Kevin pointed out, can you hide in plain sight, you're getting the economies of scale when defense can leverage that huge commercial network. And that's very, very important. But I'll tell you, I spent a lot of time on countering foreign investment in the US, the CFIUS committee, when I was at DOD. And frankly, this is one of the areas where we were using these supply chain illumination tools to really dig back through in terms of beneficial ownership as we looked at different mergers, acquisitions, real estate, acquisitions, and it was incredibly important because that's how we understood the money trail and who owned. So the activity around CFIUS right now is really significant. The transactional load is high, but without these types of illumination tools, they would not be able to do their job. I frankly think that a lot of, well, let me go back to one thing that might be more interesting. We are really following in the defense area a lot of what has gone on in the financial area. So for instance, the Fed, if you recall, a number of years ago, started stress testing banks to make sure that they could hold up. And that is now standard practice. I actually had a CNBC reporter call me last week talking about doing the same thing at the Department of Defense, stress testing supply chains to see what could happen. These are the types of things we're going to see more of. And I think industry CEOs, from a risk management point of view, are going to find their audit committees on their boards are going to start asking these same types of questions. And I think they are going to have to begin to work with some of these services to proactively understand where they are, where the risk is, before the government comes in and says, hey, show me where you are. And if you can't, I'm going to do it for you. So I think that there's a whole area of risk mitigation that CFOs and general counsels and audit committees are going to have to look at, because it is a global economy. There is so much pervasive adversarial infiltration, if you will, that we need to understand this. CIOs are doing this all the time with their networks, but it's becoming very subtle. So we have to understand who the players are. And I think it's only through this data analysis that we are going to get there. And it really requires a lot of the AI developments that have taken place over just the last year.
Yeah, excellent. So I really appreciate your time. I know how busy your schedule is. I would like to offer you an opportunity to just provide a closing remark if there's something that you wanted to touch on that we haven't, or if you just want to recap a little bit, Ellen. It's just a pleasure talking to you. So closing.
Well, Ted, thank you so much for the opportunity. And I will just say that there is such opportunity here at the intersection of industry and national security. And sometimes it can be daunting to know where to begin, where to go. But I will tell you, if you were going to pick one sector, one segment where there is a lot going on, very, I think, clever people in leadership positions in the government, it would be Space Force and Space Comm. A lot of momentum behind it, both from the administration and Congress, and it is a warfighting domain, and there's a lot we need to do there, not only defensively, but to have offensive capability so that we just have that capability. and it's known by our adversaries. Nothing like peace through strength, if you will. So a great sector to be in. I'm very excited to have opportunity to talk to everyone, and lots more to be done at the intersection of industry and national security. Thank you.
Thank you. You know, it's very interesting that you would amplify. Like my fireside chat yesterday was with Lieutenant General J.T. Thompson, who I know you know, and at Space Force. And one of the things that stuck with me that he said was the Space Force needs to learn from the private sector about innovation, about entrepreneurial business models, and about how to handle and embrace this transformational change. It's interesting to me that you would amplify that kind of a perspective. And
yeah,
so,
I didn't watch it, but it's true. It's true.
well, listen, again, David, I'm going to toss it back to you. And Scott, I just want to thank again the Honorable Miss Ellen Lord, a leader in industry as a CEO of Textron and in other capacities, as well as a very successful OSD acquisition and sustainment leader at a very difficult time in the U.S. history. We're suffering and dealing with both the opportunity and the challenge of this technology leadership crossover to the private sector, as well as increasing threat vectors in terms of cyber, as well as unexpected challenges like COVID and the way we have to deal with those on a unexpected sometimes basis. So I thank you for your leadership. Thank you for your time. And David and Scott, back to you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's an honor having you, ma'am.